Welcome back to another Gaming Memories video. Here we're actually looking at a game called Explosive Racing that was actually released in mid 1997, and it's actually a sequel to a game called Burning Road that was released by the same developers known as Toka. They never released too many games on the PlayStation that I know of. They're a Japanese developer from what I remember, and they only released I think a handful of games on the European or American market. They primarily develop games more so in Japan. But essentially this is a sequel to the first game, like I mentioned, Burning Road. I'll leave a link in the description if you haven't checked that out, because I've already done a video on that game as well previously, so be sure to check that out and even watch that before you watch this one here. And this here is pretty much the same type of game as the original, but it is slightly different in terms of the likes of the tracks and so forth that you can race on, and it's definitely more over the top. It is an out and out pure arcade type racer with a load of different quirky little ideas and elements and so forth. Graphically, back in the day, it would definitely would not have been as refined as a lot of other games that would have been out at that time, and this would have been before the likes of Gran Turismo and Colin McRae Rally and all those really good high quality and high caliber games. But essentially these type of games here were all just about just simplicity and just fun. As like I said, it's just a classic version of pretty much like an arcade type of racer. If you've ever played the likes of Sega Rally or even Daytona USA and the arcades, or even the likes of the Sega Saturn, you'll probably feel more at home here, because the premise of those games are similar to what's involved in this here. And essentially all you're doing really is just driving around as fast as you can around tracks. The tracks are very wide, and it just has an arcade feel where you're sliding and you're drifting around corners in order to try and gain positions, to try and obviously win each race so that you can proceed on to the next track. Now, likes of other games in these here series, and even if you've played any other games that I've mentioned or other videos I've done, likes of the Ridge Racer series and other games like it, most of these games back in those days only ever limited you to around 3 tracks and a limited number of cars, and again the difficulty would increase and you'd unlock different elements as you played through the game, but you were always quite limited in terms of the track layouts and so forth. But again, for what these type of games were, they were just simplistic in their nature, and they were just good fun. If you wanted to play casually and just have a bit of a laugh, they were very good to try out. This here now being the sequel, the Burning Road, was a bit more on the cartoony type of side, even though the original game had a cartoony aesthetic, but this here is a bit more over the top in terms of what it's supposed to offer. And again, it's a fun game to play, but it is a difficult game to master. That's the one thing I will definitely say. A lot of these games back in those days were definitely quite difficult to master, because again, you'd be trying to drift and trying to get used to the mechanics and so forth. There was very little room for error in these type of games, and this here is no exception, because if you made any sort of mistake at all, you'd lose so much time, and literally you'd be so far behind the pack that you would have to spend most of the race trying to gather your place back, which was very, very hard to do. And it added to the challenge of it as well. So when you're going, you can see here, when you're drifting around corners, you need to be careful that you don't get caught against the side banks of the roads, because they completely throw you off and you crash into everything. Or what actually happens is, in this case, you can see there, you get stuck in the walls, and that drastically slows down the speed of your car. So again, that just leaves the opportunities open for the other computer controlled drivers to literally just fly past you. And like I said, then you're spending the majority of the race trying to catch up and regain your places again. So it can be quite difficult to literally pick up and play. But again, if you're looking for something that's really casual, it's definitely worth a look. I do remember now, way back in 1997, I was 15 years old, this time now, at this stage, we didn't actually have a PlayStation of my own. We'd been renting out a PlayStation at the weekends, or say if our mates or whatever had PlayStations, we'd go round to their houses or whatever and playing them. And I do remember this game actually coming out around the midpoint of '97, and this game was everywhere. Like, it was heavily promoted, all the magazines, and for months this game was pretty much everywhere because it had a cartoony aspect, and obviously it seemed to be like that they were aiming it more on the likes of kids and so forth, which was definitely the aesthetic to it. But I do remember for months seeing this game literally everywhere. Every shop you went into, even when you were going to buy games or whatever, there was copies of this game everywhere. And literally, like, all magazines and so forth, and these were back in the days now where we didn't actually have access to, like, say, computer or even the internet. The internet was only relatively new at this point, so you didn't really have access to any of that. So it was mainly all reading through magazines and articles and so forth. But I do remember this game being heavily published and publicised and advertised. You used to see it pretty much everywhere for the majority, for quite a few months during 1997, so it obviously sold quite well. Now myself, I hadn't experienced it at that point in time. Again, it was like a lot of the other games I played in the system, like I mentioned in previous videos, where it took a few years for me to actually experience it. I remember actually getting to play it then. I think I got it on eBay, I think a good few years later, and I got it actually relatively cheap. But again, you could find copies on eBay literally like anywhere. It was such an easy game to actually find. So again, it sold a lot in its day, so it wasn't a difficult game to find by any means, and you could get it relatively cheap. Now, compared to other games, if you wanted a game that had longevity in it, where you could play it for long periods of time, this wouldn't be that type of game, because again, on the likes of Gran Turismo, Colin McRae Rally and other racers that were similar to it, this had more of an arcade feel, and this was more of a casual type game. It was difficult to master, yes, but you wouldn't be playing it as long as some of those other games. Those other games require long playthroughs and hours upon hours of grinding races in order to get through and unlock other features. Whereas these type of games, if you could master it, you can unlock everything within a handful of like a few races. But again, there was other cars to unlock, but again, it took a while to unlock them, because you had to you'd probably have to race through each of these races probably about 7 or 8, maybe even 10 times before you'd even win even once. But I suppose back then that was just the appeal of it, and that was just the fun of it. Games today now do have their own challenges, but I find with the likes of these older games, they were a lot more difficult to master. But again, the sense of reward that you got for completing them was just as good. And like I always mention on the PlayStation, and you're probably wondering why I always cover a lot of racing games, because as you probably noticed, the PlayStation had literally any amount of racing games in all different types and genres, pretty much all shapes and sizes, so you could actually find PlayStation racing games in all forms. So there really was, it was the perfect console back in those days that had something pretty much for everybody. Even like racing games, like I mentioned, there was a unique kind of element to all the games that actually appealed to different types of people. Whether you were into these games or not, you could always find a game that would suit your preference or your interest. And this here was no exception. If you were a casual arcade type of guy where you wanted to play arcade racers, or even just say more so even for kids, this here would have been a fun game for kids back in the day. So you can see here now, compared to the first game, the level layouts are slightly different. You have a bit more going on in the levels, a bit more variation, and even the graphical style is very, very different as well. But the aesthetic of the game is still very much the same, where the tracks are very long and wide. There's a lot of really sharp bends that you have to drift around, which is very, very hard to master, literally with clipping the side wall of the track, which always slows you down and makes you lose so much time, and you lose all your places as well, so you're constantly having to regain your places. But again, it's like everything else, you just have to keep at it until you master it, and eventually you will get the hang of it. But it's a fun game to play regardless. If you're into these type of racers, which I was back in the day, I used to love playing these type of casual type games, and I would actually sit and play them for quite a while, trying to master them. Because the one thing for me is when I would play these type of games, even like my mates and my brothers and that would laugh at me, like, why are you playing these type of games? Because I just wanted to see the value in everything that I had and everything that I played on the console, because I just loved the PlayStation 1 that much. And racing games are definitely one of my favourite genres, and the PlayStation was just exceptional for that level of the amount of games that were available. So there was so much to choose from, so I wanted to give every game that I had pretty much a good go at that point in time, because like I said, there was always something there to play and really get your teeth into. So this year, well, it was a really good casual game just for a bit of fun, and I actually enjoyed it, especially if you like mentioned, like if you look back to games like arcade games like the Daytona USA and stuff like that. This year reminded me an awful lot of that, because I do remember playing that game a lot in the arcades and I actually really enjoyed it. So this year definitely you felt right at home with it, and it was quirky. The graphics were kind of funny as well, because it was more based at younger type of players, so it was a bit fun. And the fact that you could go on motorcycles as well as cars and even trucks, so you had a good array of different types of vehicles that you could drive in. And even with the likes of this here, you can see the weather effects too, that the weather would change depending on how long you were on the track. So as the laps would go on, you'd go into like day and night time cycles, and you could even have the likes of thunderstorms and even a bit of rain and stuff, and it was harder to see, which added to the element of the difficulty of the game. So it changed the dynamic of actually how you played, so it would actually make tracks a lot more difficult the longer you played, and it was a lot harder to keep your concentration going the longer the laps and the races went on. But again, it just added to the fun element of it, so it was actually quite good. Now I will admit, the likes of the graphics in this game doesn't hold up well today compared to when you look at more modern games. But again, games like these have their own unique appeal. They stand like for a different crowd, and if you're into your retro games at all, they're definitely worth having a look into, in my opinion. I'm sure any of you that are out there that are big into your retro games or have played games like this would understand that, and you probably have played a lot of these, if not this particular game, and actually enjoyed it as well. Or maybe not. It totally depends on the player and what they feel for the experience of the games. But for me personally, I just wanted to just enjoy every experience I had on the PS1 that much, because again, like I said, it is my favourite console of all time, and every game in my opinion on the console, regardless of the quality of whether they were good or bad, every single one of them offered something unique that was different from every other game that you played. They always done something in a different way. They kind of always stood out, and it's funny because you always do remember it. It always leaves a lasting impression on your mind, and it's something you can always relate to if you ever want to talk about stories, or if you're explaining like your favourite memories and so forth. You'll always remember like these type of games. You're like, oh, I remember this game, I enjoyed that bit about it, I didn't enjoy this bit about it, but you could always remember it. And that's the one thing I loved about this console and these games, because they definitely added to that appeal. So this here game was no different. So it's a good title to play if you wanted a quick race and just a bit of fun for a few minutes, or for half an hour or so forth if you wanted to, if you had a little bit of time to spare. And it's definitely a game worth checking out, especially if you're into your racing games, especially if you like arcade racing games. So that's it for this video of explosive racing. So hopefully you've actually seen what it's about, and that you actually have even experienced it, or even if you haven't experienced it, I would highly recommend that you at least go and just have a go and just see what you think for yourself. At the end of the day, you've got nothing to lose, and these games are quite fun to play, even if they are on the difficult side. So what are your memories of this game? Did you enjoy it? Make sure to let me know down in the comments. So if you have enjoyed this video, make sure to leave a like. Also hit that subscribe button and turn on the bell icon to be updated of future videos, as I will be releasing more videos on racing games and so forth about the PlayStation. And as always, until next time, keep those gaming memories alive.